Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took over as the Flash after Barry Allen vanished? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain over Musitifa was a torrent, a relentless gray sheet that washed the color from a world already choked with dust and debris. Each drop that struck the cracked asphalt of the ruined city block hissed, steam rising in ghostly plumes from the superheated rubble. In the heart of this desolation, two figures stood in stark opposition, a maelstrom of destruction and a battered bastion of hope. Izuku Midoriya, known to the frightened whispers of the city as Deku, was a study in exhaustion. His vigilante costume, a ragged and functional evolution of his uniform, was torn and scorched. The Gran Torino-esque cape was little more than tattered yellow strips clinging to the armored plates on his shoulders. The metal mask, designed to evoke a rictus grin of indomitable hope, was cracked across one eye lens, rainwater tracing a clean line through the grime on his cheek. Green lightning, the vibrant signature of One for All, flickered around him like a dying flame, inconsistent and weak. He had been fighting for 3 days straight, running on nothing but ration bars and a burning, desperate need to save everyone. His opponent, a villain calling himself Paradox, laughed. It was a sound like grinding glass. Still standing, little hero? You're just a monument to futility. You patch one hole in reality, and a dozen more spring up. This world is broken. It's begging to be unmade. Paradox's quirk was a nightmare. He didn't just destroy, he uncreated. The air around him shimmered and warped, making the space he occupied seem fundamentally unstable. A chunk of a fallen skyscraper behind him would flicker, replaced for a second by the pristine building it once was, then by a field of wildflowers, then back to rubble. He could touch an object and erase its history, its purpose, its very existence. You're wrong, Deku gasped, his lungs burning. He shifted his weight, the iron soles of his boots scraping against the uneven ground. Every muscle screamed in protest. He could feel the vestiges of One for All within him, a silent chorus of ghosts urging him onward, their own exhaustion a faint echo in his soul. Even a broken world is worth saving. Even one person is worth saving. He had cornered Paradox here, after the villain had unraveled an entire city block, leaving a void of shimmering, nonsensical space where hundreds of homes used to be. Thankfully, Deku had evacuated everyone first, a frantic, lightning-fast ballet of rescues that had pushed him to his absolute limit. Now, it was just the two of them. Such a tedious sentiment, Paradox sneered, raising a hand. A nearby car, already a twisted wreck, simply ceased to be, leaving behind a perfectly car-shaped hole in the rain. Let me show you the beauty of nothingness, he lunged, and the world dissolved into chaos. Deku activated One for All, pushing past the pain. 45%. It was all he could manage without shattering his already fractured bones. Green energy surged, and he met the villain's charge. Their battle was less a physical confrontation and more a war against physics. Paradox would warp the ground beneath Deku's feet, turning solid concrete into a viscous, tar-like substance. Deku would use air force to create platforms of pressurized air to leap from. Paradox would send out waves of spatial distortion, aiming to twist Deku's limbs into unrecognizable shapes. Deku would use Black Whip to anchor himself, the tendrils of dark energy lashing out to grip stable points in the chaotic environment. He's getting desperate, Deku's analytical mind muttered, a frantic hum beneath the roar of the fight. His attacks are getting wider, less controlled. He's running out of energy too, I just have to outlast him. One good hit. Strapped to his left gauntlet was a piece of support gear he'd hoped he wouldn't have to use. It was a new prototype from Hatsume, delivered by a drone just that morning. She had called it the Dimensional Stabilizer MK2. Her note, scrawled on a greasy napkin, read, "This little baby should counteract localized reality flux. Or it might turn you into a pot plant. 50/50ths. Use with spirit." It was a risk, but it was his only ace. Seeing an opening, Deku gathered the last dregs of his strength. He funneled One for All into his legs and shot forward, a green blur against the gray backdrop. St. Louis! Smash! He didn't aim for Paradox, but for the ground just in front of him. The axe kick sent a cataclysmic shockwave through the street, shattering the warped reality and forcing Paradox onto solid, stable ground for the first time in minutes. The villain stumbled, his concentration broken. "It's over!" Deku yelled, preparing a final Delaware smash. Paradox looked up, his eyes wild with nihilistic glee. "No, little hero. It's a new beginning. The beginning of the end." He clapped his hands together, and all the shimmering distortions around them collapsed inward, focusing into a single point in front of his chest. It was a sphere of perfect blackness, a hole in the universe that didn't just absorb light, but seemed to absorb reality itself. "0 unraveling!" he screamed. "Everything ends. You. Me. This miserable world. It all ends in silence." The sphere pulsed and expanded. Deku felt a horrifying tug, as if his own existence were a thread being pulled from a tapestry. The memories of his childhood, of All Might, of his friends at UA, they flickered in his mind, feeling thin and fragile. There was no time to dodge. It was now or never. His thumb slammed down on the activation switch for Hatsume's device. "Please work, Hatsum-san!" The dimensional stabilizer whined, a high-pitched shriek that cut through the storm. Blue light erupted from the gauntlet, forming a protective field around him. For a glorious second it held. The pull of the void lessened, but then came the sparks. The device shuddered violently, the light flickering from a steady blue to a frantic, angry red. An alarm blared from the tiny speaker. "Warning! Extreme energy overload. Reality anchor failure imminent." Hatsume's 50-50 odds had just come up tails. The unraveling sphere made contact with the failing stabilizer field. It was not an explosion. It was a silent, terrible tear. The two opposing forces, one designed to erase reality, the other to anchor it, didn't cancel each other out. They reacted, creating a catastrophic feedback loop. A pinprick of impossible color appeared between Deku and Paradox. It ripped open, not with a bang, but with the sound of a universe being torn like paper. Deku's world vanished. He was pulled forward into the rift, his scream swallowed by the kaleidoscopic chaos. The sensation was indescribable, a violent assault on every sense. He saw ribbons of light that he knew were shattered timelines, heard the echoes of conversations that would never happen, and felt the crushing weight of infinite possibilities pressing in on him. Worst of all was the feeling of one for all. It was being stripped from him, unraveled thread by thread. He felt the connection to the vestiges, a bond that had become as natural as breathing, begin to fray. He heard their voices, distorted and distant, crying out in a chorus of fading energy. Nana Shimura. "Stay strong, kid!" Daigoro Banjo. "It's pulling us apart." Yoichi Shigaraki. 9th. The connection, it's... The green lightning that defined him was torn away, absorbed into the vortex. The power that had been passed down through 9 generations, the sacred torch, felt like it was being extinguished. The embers in his soul grew cold, and for the first time since that day on the beach with All Might, he felt a horrifying, soul-deep emptiness. He was losing a part of himself, a part he could never get back. Then, the vortex spat him out, and the chaos was replaced by a final, profound blackness. Cold. That was the first thing Izuku's consciousness registered. A deep, biting cold that seeped through the tattered remains of his suit. The second was the rough texture of brick against his cheek. The third was the smell, wet asphalt, overflowing trash, and something vaguely like stale hot dogs. He groaned, pushing himself up. Every joint ached, a deep, resonant pain that was different from the sharp agony of broken bones. This was the ache of a body that had been fundamentally violated. His head throbbed in time with a slow, weak pulse. He took a shaky inventory. His gear was a wreck. The gauntlets were fused metal slag, the dimensional stabilizer completely melted. His mask was gone. The iron soles of his boots were still intact, but that was little comfort. He reached inside himself, searching for the familiar, comforting warmth of one for all. There was nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He closed his eyes, concentrating, pushing, trying to summon even a flicker of green energy. He flexed his fingers, waiting for the familiar crackle. Nothing. He tried to call on Blackwhip, to feel for the familiar surge. Nothing. Float. Danger sense. Smoke screen. All of it. Gone. The internal sun that was one for all had been snuffed out, leaving only a hollow void. He was quirkless. Again. The thought was so terrifying it almost sent him back into unconsciousness. His breath hitched, turning into a ragged sob. He had gone back to being the person he was before he met All Might, useless, powerless Deku. He forced the panic down, shoving it into a box in his mind. Analyze. Survive. Figure it out later. He was a hero. Heroes didn't panic. They acted. He staggered to his feet, using the damp brick wall for support, and looked around. He was in a narrow alleyway, wedged between two tall buildings. Rain was still falling, but it was a gentle drizzle now, not the downpour of his fight. The sky above was a sliver of bruised, inky purple. Night had fallen. But the architecture was wrong. The buildings were made of a dark brick and ornate stone he'd never seen in Japan. A fire escape, a complex lattice of rusted iron, snaked its way up one wall. He stumbled out of the alley onto the street. The city was a dazzling display of lights and noise. Cars, sleek and unfamiliar in design, hissed by on the wet pavement. Neon signs and dazzling colors reflected off the puddles, painting the world in strokes of electric blue, vibrant pink, and burning gold. And the signs, they were all in English. Central City Bank, Big Belly Burger, Keystone Cabs. He heard the conversations of passers-by, a cacophony of voices. He understood every word. A cold dread settled in his stomach. His hero studies, particularly his focus on international heroes and All Might's time in America, had forced him to become fluent in English. The fact that he could understand everything confirmed it. This wasn't a weird, foreign-themed district in Japan. This wasn't even Japan. He was somewhere else entirely. A new wave of panic, stronger this time, threatened to overwhelm him. His friends. His mother. All Might. They were gone. He was alone, stripped of his power, stranded in a world that wasn't his own. A profound sense of loss, heavier than any physical blow, crushed him. He was just a lost, quirkless teenager in a strange city. A nobody. It was then that the sky began to change. The drizzling rain stopped abruptly. An unnatural stillness fell over the city, the ambient noise of traffic and people seeming to dampen. The bruised purple of the sky began to churn, darkening to a malevolent black-violet. The air grew thick, heavy with static electricity that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. It tasted of ozone and something else, something wild and ancient. A low hum resonated through the air, a sound that felt less heard and more felt in his bones. People on the street stopped, looking up at the sky with a mixture of confusion and fear. Izuku, trained to recognize threats, felt every instinct scream wrong. This wasn't a natural storm. This was something else. Then he saw it. A flicker of light within the churning clouds. Not the white-blue of normal lightning, but a deep, vibrant crimson. It wasn't a random flash. It moved with a terrifying purpose, like a predator hunting through the sky. As it raced through the clouds, Izuku caught a glimpse of something within the crimson, a faint, almost imperceptible aura of emerald green, a ghostly echo of the power he had just lost. The world seemed to hold its breath. The crimson bolt descended. It moved with impossible speed, a jagged spear of pure energy aimed directly at his block. Izuku's eyes widened in terror. He was frozen, a spectator to some cosmic event he couldn't possibly comprehend. The bolt didn't strike him. It struck a large, cylindrical chemical storage unit on the roof of a low-slung industrial building a few feet away. The sign on the side of the building read, SDR, Lab Satellite Storage. The impact was silent for a split second. A flash of blinding red light, and then the world erupted. The storage unit exploded, not with a conventional blast of fire and shrapnel, but with a concussive wave of aerosolized chemicals. A shimmering, rainbow-hued wave of unknown substances washed over the alley. Izuku threw his arms up to shield his face, but it was useless. The chemical cocktail drenched him, a cold, slimy shock that soaked through his ruined costume and clung to his skin. It smelled acrid and sterile, like a hospital and a lightning strike combined. And then the energy hit him. The raw power from the initial blast, the very essence of that crimson and green lightning, followed the chemical wave. It wasn't like being struck. It was like being invaded. Agony. Pure, undiluted, elemental agony. If receiving one for all was like having a dam break inside him, this was like having the entire ocean forced into his veins through a needle. Every cell in his body screamed. Every nerve ending was set alight. He felt his own DNA being violently, crudely rewritten. The energy surged through him, a raging river of power with no direction and no purpose but to move. He felt a connection snap into place, a tether to something vast and incomprehensible, a dimension of pure kinetic energy. It was a feeling of infinite motion, of a race that had no beginning and no end. His mind fractured. He saw flashes of red. A man in a crimson suit running, a kind smile on his face. A bolt of yellow lightning, filled with a terrible, consuming hatred. A city of crystal and light, impossibly far in the future. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it, there was something else. A familiar feeling, magnified 1,000 times over. It was the feeling of power settling into his bones, the same way One for All had. But this was different. It wasn't a torch being passed. It was a force of nature choosing a new conduit. His body began to vibrate, an uncontrollable tremor that started in his hands and spread through his entire frame. The world around him slowed to a crawl. He saw a single raindrop, a perfect crystalline sphere, hang suspended in the air a few inches from his nose. He could see the reflection of his own terrified, wide eye on its surface. Then, mercifully, the world snapped back to normal speed, and the sheer force of the event overloaded his system. His vision tunneled, the vibrant colors of the city collapsing into a single point of light. His last conscious thought was not of fear, but of a strange, poignant irony. I just got my quirk back. And then, for the second time that night, Izuku Midoriya knew only darkness. Inside SDR Labs, the heart of Central City scientific and metahuman operations, chaos was a controlled substance. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Do you see this? Cisco Ramon shouted, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Multiple monitors in the cortex, the lab's main hub, were flashing red. On the central screen, a graph depicting tachyonic energy levels was spiking into uncharted territory. Dr. Caitlin Snow rushed to his side, her expression a mixture of clinical concern and weary dread. What is it? Is it another echo? For months, ever since the flash, their friend, Barry Allen, had vanished in a blaze of light during the crisis. They had been haunted by echoes, faint, residual energy spikes that mimicked the signature of the speed force, but ultimately led to nothing. Ghosts in the machine. No, this is no echo, Cisco said, his voice hushed with awe. He pointed a trembling finger at a specific data stream. The initial signature, it's a temporal spatial rupture. A forced entry. But the secondary spike. Caitlin, it's a full-blown speed force event. The same magnitude as the particle accelerator explosion. The same magnitude as the night Barry. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what he meant. Where is it? Caitlin asked, already grabbing a medical kit. Her mind was racing through protocols, triage procedures for injuries caused by forces that defied medicine. Corner of O'Neill and Broome. Right next to our old satellite storage facility, Cisco replied, grabbing the keys to their van. The one we were supposed to decommission 6 months ago. A cold feeling washed over Caitlin. The one with the experimental polymer reactants and the cryomethane accelerants? Cisco winced. Yeah. That one. Let's go. Now. The drive was short and filled with a tense silence. They arrived to a scene of contained chaos. A single fire truck was on site, its crew looking bewildered as they sprayed foam onto a smoking crater that pulsed with a strange, residual energy. There was no fire, just heat and the smell of ozone. Stay here, I'll check the perimeter, Caitlin instructed, pulling on a pair of insulated gloves. Not a chance, Cisco said, grabbing a sophisticated handheld scanner from the back of the van. We do this together. They navigated through the debris, the scanner whining and clicking in Cisco's hand. The energy readings were off the charts. It was localized, centered on a single point in the alleyway beside the destroyed facility. And in the center of that point, lying unconscious in a puddle of rainwater and iridescent chemicals, was a boy. He was a mess. Dressed in some kind of ragged, homemade tactical suit, with green hair matted with grime and blood. He looked no older than 16. Caitlin immediately knelt, her inner doctor taking over. He's breathing. Pulses, my God! She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, her eyes widening. It's too fast. It feels like a hummingbird's wing. I can't even get a count. Cisco's scanner beeped frantically. Caitlin, his biosignatures are in flux. Cellular structure is regenerating? No, that's not right. It's being rewritten. And the energy, it's not around him, it's coming from him. He pointed the scanner at the ground. The scorch marks on the asphalt weren't random. They radiated outwards from the boy's body in the distinct, fractal pattern of a Lichtenberg figure, the telltale sign of a massive electrical discharge. But the pattern was reversed. The lightning hadn't struck him. It had come out of him. Caitlin's gaze fell on the melted piece of technology on his arm, a bizarre fusion of metal and plastic that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. What is he? Cisco lowered the scanner, his mind, a library of impossible science and comic book lore, finally putting the pieces together. The temporal rupture. The massive speed force event. The chemicals. The lightning. A boy at the center of it all, his body rewriting itself on a molecular level. It was impossible. It was a miracle. It was terrifying. He looked at Caitlin, his expression a cocktail of fear, hope, and sheer, unadulterated wonder. I don't know, he said softly, the rain starting to fall again around them. But I think we just found a lightning strike. And it chose to strike twice. The first sensation to pierce the thick, woolly blanket of unconsciousness was a sound, a steady, rhythmic beeping that was infuriatingly calm. It was a sound Izuku Midoriya associated with Recovery Girl's office, a prelude to a stern lecture and a gummy of questionable flavor. But this was different. The air didn't smell of medicinal herbs and old lady perfume. It smelled of antiseptic, ozone, and a faint, pleasant aroma that reminded him of freshly printed circuit boards. He forced his eyelids open, the muscles feeling heavy and unresponsive. The world swam into focus, a blur of white and chrome. He was lying in a bed with sheets so crisp they felt like they could cut paper. A thin, transparent tube was taped to the back of his hand, leading to an 4 bag filled with a clear fluid. His gaze drifted around the room. It was less a hospital room and more a laboratory that happened to contain a bed. Gleaming consoles lined one wall, their screens displaying scrolling lines of code and complex biological waveforms he didn't recognize. Panic, a familiar cold companion, began to prickle at the edges of his mind. He pushed himself up, his body aching in a strange, thrumming way. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of broken bones he was so used to. This was a deeper, cellular vibration, as if every atom in his body was a bell that had just been struck. He reached inward, a desperate, instinctual act, searching for the familiar, comforting sun of one for all. He found only a hollow, echoing void. The panic intensified, constricting his chest. It was real. It was gone. He was powerless, trapped in a strange, sterile room, in a strange, alien city. Easy there. You're safe. The voice was female, calm and professional. Izuku's head snapped towards the sound. A woman with auburn hair tied back in a neat ponytail stood in the doorway. She wore a blue sweater and a reassuring smile, though her eyes, a warm brown, held a flicker of deep-seated weariness. Beside her stood a man with long, dark hair and a t-shirt bearing the phrase, "I went to the Speed Force and all I got was this lousy t-shirt and crippling emotional trauma." He had a goatee and an expression of such barely contained, wide-eyed excitement that he looked like he might vibrate apart. Where am I?" Izuku asked, his voice raspy. The words came out in perfect, unaccented English, a fact that both surprised and terrified him. It confirmed his worst fear. He was a long, long way from home. "You're in SDR Labs," the woman said, taking a cautious step into the room. "My name is Dr. Caitlin Snow. This is my colleague, Cisco Ramon." "Dude," Cisco breathed, his eyes scanning Izuku from head to toe. "You were at the epicenter of a full-scale tachyonic event combined with a Z-particle cascade. Your cellular structure was basically a rave party for quantum mechanics. How are you even, like, person-shaped right now?" Caitlin shot him a look that could have frozen a volcano. "Cisco," bedside manner. She turned back to Izuku, her expression softening. We found you unconscious in an alley. There was an explosion at our nearby storage facility. You were caught in the blast. Do you remember what happened? Izuku's mind raced, trying to piece together the fractured memories. The fight with Paradox. The unraveling. The blinding, tearing light. The vortex. And then, the storm. The crimson lightning. The chemicals. The searing, rewriting agony. His eyes widened. The lightning. I was struck. But that wasn't right. The energy had felt different. Struck is one word for it. Cisco muttered, tapping away at a tablet he was holding. Another would be chosen, anointed, or zapped into a higher state of being. Your biometrics are nuts. Your resting heart rate is over 300 BPM, but your blood pressure is perfectly normal. Your body is burning calories at a rate that would make a blue whale jealous, and your cellular regeneration is, well, it's just plain showing off at this point. Every word Cisco said was another bar in the cage of Izuku's fear. They had him hooked up to machines. They were studying him. Was this a hospital, or a prison? Had he been captured by villains who were analyzing his what? His quirklessness? The residual energy of One for All? Or this new, terrifying power he barely understood? He had to get out. I have to go, he said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The tattered remnants of his vigilante suit had been removed, replaced by a simple set of gray sweatpants and a t-shirt. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Whoa, hey, easy there, Sonic, Cisco said, holding up his hands. You just woke up. You need to rest. I'm fine, Izuku insisted, his voice tight with desperation. He stood up, his legs feeling strangely light and coiled with a kinetic energy he couldn't comprehend. He needed to find a way back. He had to get back to his friends, to his mother, to his duty. He took a step, then another, his gaze fixed on the door. Please, just listen, Caitlin pleaded, her voice gentle but firm. We just want to help. He didn't listen. He reached out to push past them, his hand aiming for the metal bedrail to steady himself, and his hand went right through it. The world screeched to a halt. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. His hand, vibrating so fast it was a translucent blur, was sunk halfway through the solid steel bar. He felt a bizarre, tingling numbness, like his arm had fallen asleep in a universe made of television static. The metal of the rail offered no more resistance than a puff of smoke. He yelped, a high-pitched sound of pure shock, and snatched his hand back. It solidified, becoming flesh and bone once more. He stared at his trembling fingers, then at the perfectly intact bedrail, then at the stunned faces of the two scientists. Caitlin's mouth was slightly agape, her clinical composure momentarily shattered. Cisco, on the other hand, looked as if he'd just been told he'd won the lottery and a lifetime supply of churros. Phase! He yelled, pointing a triumphant finger. He can phase! I knew it! The molecular oscillation must be off the charts. Izuku stumbled back, hitting the wall. The strange thrumming in his body intensified, a wild, untamed power bubbling just beneath his skin. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were a part of you, an extension of your being, coded into your DNA since birth. This felt alien. Parasitic. It was a storm raging inside him, and he didn't know how to stop it. What's happening to me? He whispered, his voice trembling. Seeing his genuine terror, Caitlin's professional demeanor returned. She took a deep breath, her expression becoming one of profound empathy. It's okay, she said, her voice low and soothing. We know this is confusing. And scary. But you're not alone. We've seen this before. She gestured for him to follow, leading them out of the med bay and into the main hub of the facility. Izuku, too stunned to resist, followed numbly. He walked into a massive, circular room that looked like the bridge of a starship. A multi-tiered platform was at the center, surrounded by a ring of powerful computers, their screens displaying weather patterns, news feeds, and complex energy signatures. The place hummed with power and potential, but there was also a profound sense of emptiness to it. A chair at the main console was vacant, a lightning bolt symbol etched into its headrest. A coffee mug with the Central City Police Department logo sat on a nearby desk, a faint ring of a long cold drink at the bottom. The air was thick with unspoken grief. This place was haunted. This is the Cortex, Caitlin explained. It's our base of operations. Operations for what? Izuku asked, his analytical mind starting to stir beneath the fear. Cisco leaned against the console, his earlier excitement tempered by a sudden solemnity. To help him, he said, nodding towards a large screen. He typed a few commands, and the screen flickered to life. An image appeared, a newspaper article from the Central City Citizen. The headline was stark: "The Flash vanishes in crisis." Below it was a picture of a man in a sleek, crimson suit, a golden lightning bolt emblazoned on his chest. His cowl was pulled back, revealing a kind, handsome face with warm eyes and a friendly smile. He was waving to an unseen crowd, a picture of hope and optimism. Izuku stared at the image. A pro-hero. He'd never heard of him, but the way he carried himself, the genuine light in his eyes, he looked like a true hero. He looked like All Might. Who is he? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. That was Barry Allen, Caitlin said softly, her gaze fixed on the screen with a painful longing. He was a forensic scientist for the CCPD. And he was the fastest man alive. He was the Flash. Cisco took over, his voice filled with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. 7 years ago, this lab's particle accelerator exploded. It bathed the city in a wave of dark matter and unknown energies. It created people with extraordinary abilities. Metahumans. The word was unfamiliar, but Izuku understood the concept immediately. Quirks, but born from a single event. The storm from that explosion, Cisco continued. It sent a bolt of lightning into Barry's lab. It struck him, knocked him into a shelf of chemicals. When he woke up from a coma 9 months later, he was connected to the Speed Force. The Speed Force? Izuku repeated, the name sounding both absurd and profound. It's hard to explain, Caitlin said. It's an extra-dimensional energy. Some physicists think it's the source of all kinetic energy in the multiverse. It's what powers speedsters. It's what gave Barry his incredible speed. Cisco pointed back at Izuku. And whatever happened in that alley, the lightning, the chemicals from our storage unit, the weird energy from your world, it didn't just give you powers. It gave you his powers. It made you a speedster. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The lightning with the green aura. The rewriting of his body. The uncontrollable vibration, the impossible speed. He hadn't been given a quirk. He had been given a dead man's power. Barry dedicated his life to using his speed to protect this city, Caitlin said, her voice thick with emotion. He fought countless threats, saved thousands of lives. He was a beacon, and then, the crisis came. An antimatter wave threatened to destroy all of reality. Barry, he ran faster than he'd ever run before to stop it. He ran so fast he ran himself out of existence. He vanished into the Speed Force, saving everyone. He's been gone for 6 months. 6 months. An entire city without its greatest protector. The emptiness in the room suddenly made sense. It wasn't just a quiet lab, it was a memorial. These people weren't just scientists. They were grieving friends, a family that had lost its center. We've been searching for him ever since, Cisco said, his voice dropping. Monitoring for any sign of his energy signature. But there's been nothing. Until last night. The energy that brought you here, and the energy that hit you, it's the first real Speed Force event we've detected since he disappeared. The weight of their words, of their hope and their loss, settled on Izuku's shoulders. He was an anomaly, a cosmic accident standing in the shadow of a fallen legend. He wasn't just lost, he was an intruder in someone else's tragedy. Let's see what you can do, Cisco said, his tone shifting, eager to move from the painful past to the tangible, vibrating present. We need a baseline. Come on, I've got to show you the speed lab. He led the way to a heavy, circular door that hissed open to reveal a massive, cavernous chamber. In the center was a gigantic treadmill, its belt wide enough to drive a car on, set into a circular track that ran around the room's perimeter. Consoles and sensors lined the walls, all aimed at the treadmill. It was a laboratory built for one specific purpose, to quantify the impossible. Okay, new guy, Cisco said, gesturing to the treadmill with a grand flourish. The SDR Labs Cosmic Treadmill, patent pending. Hop on. We're gonna start you slow. Just a light jog. Izuku looked at the machine, then at his own feet. He was terrified. This power wasn't the controlled, deliberate force of one for all. It was a wild animal leashed to his soul, and he was holding on for dear life. He took a hesitant step onto the belt. It felt solid beneath his bare feet. Just try to take one step, Caitlin advised from the observation console. Gently, Izuku nodded, his jaw tight. Gently. He could do that. He remembered the feeling from the alley, the world slowing down. He remembered the sensation of his hand phasing through steel. He needed to control it. He focused, treating it like his first time using full cowling. Regulate the flow. Just a tiny percentage. 1%. He lifted his foot and placed it down. The world exploded. It wasn't a step. It was a detonation of kinetic energy. His perception snapped, time stretching into an infinite, syrupy crawl. The gentle hum of the lab's ventilation system deepened into a subsonic drone. The blinking lights on the consoles became slow, lazy pulses. He could see the individual dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, glittering planet. Cisco was frozen mid-sentence, his mouth open. Caitlin's hand was halfway to her face in a gesture of shock, and he was moving. His analytical brain, which had always been his greatest asset, short-circuited. It was too much information. Too much sensory input. He was seeing in a new spectrum of colors, hearing frequencies he never knew existed, feeling the static electricity in the air against his skin. He tried to stop, to process, but his body was no longer his own. It was a vessel for pure, unadulterated speed. The single, gentle, step launched him forward with the force of a cannonball. The treadmill was a blur beneath him. He was already at the other side of the room before his brain had even registered the command to move. He saw the padded wall of the speed lab approaching. It was coming at him in agonizingly slow motion, yet he was powerless to stop his own momentum. He flailed his arms, a useless gesture that did nothing to alter his trajectory. This is going to hurt, was his last, slow thought before impact. Whump. The world snapped back to normal speed with a violent, dizzying lurch. The sound of his body hitting the reinforced padding echoed through the chamber. He slid down to the floor in a heap, his head spinning, every part of him buzzing like a struck tuning fork. Okay. Cisco's voice crackled through the intercom, a mix of alarm and sheer delight. Note to self, gently is a relative term. You just went from 0 to Mach 2 in the space of about 5 feet. Are you okay? Izuku groaned, pushing himself into a sitting position. He was completely unharmed. Not a bruise, not a scratch. The vibrating energy in his cells had absorbed the entire impact. He looked at his hands, then back at the 100-foot stretch of the lab he had just crossed in the blink of an eye. He started muttering. The initial force application was exponential, not linear. It's not about regulating a percentage of output like one for all. It's about controlling the initial kinetic ignition. The sensory input is the main problem. The processing speed of my brain can't keep up with the data influx from the physical acceleration. I would need a dampening mechanism or a way to consciously filter the information stream. Maybe if I focus on a single point and let the rest of the world blur, I could maintain equilibrium. Caitlin? Cisco's voice said over the intercom. He's muttering. Is that a side effect of terminal velocity? Should we be worried? He's analyzing. A new voice said. It was a woman's voice, calm and steady, with an undercurrent of authority that cut through the scientific chaos. He's trying to understand it. Just like Barry used to. Izuku looked up. A woman was standing in the doorway of the observation deck next to Caitlin. She was tall and poised, with intelligent, compassionate eyes that seemed to hold a universe of grief, but also an unshakable core of strength. She was looking down at him, not with pity or scientific curiosity, but with a startling amount of understanding. Iris, Caitlin said, a hint of relief in her tone. Iris West Allen walked into the speed lab, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor. She stopped a few feet from Izuku, her expression unreadable. She had been listening since she arrived, having been immediately notified by the lab's silent alarms the moment Izuku's speed registered. She had seen the impossible burst of speed, heard the crash, and now she was listening to the frantic, brilliant muttering of a terrified boy trying to apply logic to a miracle. "My name is Iris West Allen," she said, her voice even. "Barry Allen was my husband." Izuku's muttering stopped instantly. He felt a hot flush of shame, as if he'd been caught trespassing in a sacred place. He scrambled to his feet. "I am so sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean. I don't want to replace him." The words tumbled out, a torrent of his own insecurities. He was a fraud, a pale imitation. He couldn't possibly fill the shoes of the hero on the screen, the man this strong, sad woman had loved. Iris offered a small, sad smile. "No one could ever replace Barry," she said, her voice softening. "But the Speed Force, it chose you for a reason. Barry always said it was alive, that it had a will. It didn't make a mistake." She looked into his eyes, and Izuku felt as if she were looking directly into his soul. She saw the fear, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of duty that warred with his crippling self-doubt. She saw the heart of a hero, even if he didn't see it himself. "The city still needs a protector," she said. "People are scared. The rogues, the villains Barry used to fight, they're getting bolder. They know the city is vulnerable." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, gold object. It was a ring, intricately designed with a lightning bolt insignia. She held it out on the palm of her hand. "This was Barry's," she explained. "It's made of a gold titanium alloy he designed. It uses a miniaturized pressure trigger to release his suit." Izuku stared at the ring as if it were a venomous snake. The weight of its history, of the legacy it represented, felt immense. It was the symbol of the Flash. It was everything he wasn't. "I can't," he whispered, shaking his head. "I'm not him. I'm not a hero. Not here. I'm just lost." "Being a hero isn't about where you're from," Iris said, her voice unwavering. "It's about what you do when you're needed. Barry taught me that." Before Izuku could protest further, a loud, blaring alarm echoed through the cortex. Cisco's voice came over the intercom, sharp and urgent. "Iris, we've got a problem. CCPD just lit up the wire. Armed robbery in progress at the Central City Museum. They're after the Fire and Ice Diamond exhibit." Caitlin's voice followed, tight with dread. "The scanner is picking up a massive cold signature. Sub-zero temperatures localized in the West Wing. It's him." "Snart," Iris breathed, her eyes hardening. A name flashed in Izuku's mind from the villain profiles he had obsessively studied back home. It was a common theme. Shoto Todoroki. Giton. Rei Himura. Villains with ice-based quirks. Cisco's voice was grim. "Captain Cold is back. And there's no one fast enough to stop him." A heavy silence fell over the speed lab. The alarm continued to blare, a frantic heartbeat counting down the seconds until it was too late. Iris, Caitlin, and Cisco all turned their gazes to Izuku. Their faces were a mixture of desperation, fear, and a fragile, burgeoning hope. They weren't asking him to be Barry Allen. They were asking him to help. Iris extended her hand again, the golden ring gleaming under the lab lights. It was more than a piece of technology. It was a mantle. A responsibility. A plea. Cisco's voice, quiet and strained, came over the intercom, speaking the words that hung unspoken in the air. "The city needs a flash. Any flash." The blaring alarm was a physical blow, a screech of urgency that made Izuku's supercharged nerves feel like they were being scraped with raw electricity. The faces of the three people before him, Caitlin's clinical worry, Cisco's fearful excitement, and Iris's heavy, resolute grief, all turned to him. In their eyes he saw the cavernous void left by Barry Allen, and he saw them hoping, praying, that he might be the one to cast a light into it. He looked down at the golden ring in Iris's outstretched palm. It was so small, yet it felt heavier than any of All Might's weights. It was a crown, a burden, a history. His every instinct, honed by years of self-doubt and the fresh, raw wound of losing his own power, screamed for him to refuse. To say I'm not him. I can't. I'm just a kid from another universe. But then the image of the man in the crimson suit, the Flash, flashed in his mind. The kind eyes, the easy smile. A hero who had run himself out of existence to save everyone. And then, another image, All Might, skeletal and bleeding, pointing a trembling finger at him, saying, "You can become a hero." 2 worlds. 2 mentors. The same lesson. A hero is not defined by their power, but by their willingness to act when they are needed. The alarm wailed again, a desperate cry from a city in peril. Izuku took a deep, shaky breath, the air tasting of ozone and impossible choices. He looked at Iris, his own green eyes mirroring the profound sadness in hers. I'll try." The words were barely a whisper, but in the echoing silence of the speed lab, they landed with the force of a thunderclap. A flicker of relief, so potent it was almost painful to watch, crossed Iris's face. She closed his trembling fingers around the ring. The metal was cool against his skin. "The suit is made of a compressed nanofabric," Cisco explained, his voice all business now, the gravity of the situation snapping him into focus. "It's designed to be friction-proof and withstand the rigors of high-velocity movement. It's keyed to Barry's DNA, but I can override it to yours. It should mostly fit. It's smart material, it'll adjust." He tapped a few commands into a console. "Okay, point the ring forward and press the insignia." Izuku did as he was told. He held his hand out, his knuckles white, and pressed his thumb down on the lightning bolt. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the ring hissed, and a torrent of shimmering, crimson material erupted from it. It wasn't like cloth unfolding. It was like a liquid metal hologram solidifying around him. The nanofabric swarmed over his body, a wave of cool, intelligent energy. It formed boots around his feet, gloves over his hands, and a cowl over his head, leaving only the lower half of his face exposed. A symbol, a golden lightning bolt against a white circle, materialized over his chest. He was wearing the suit of the Flash. It felt wrong. It was a perfect fit, the smart material clinging to his slighter frame like a second skin, but it felt emotionally cavernous. He felt like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He was an imposter, a fraud desecrating a sacred uniform. "Comms are active." Cisco's voice crackled, this time directly in his ear through a device in the cowl. "We can see and hear everything you can. Now, the museum is 42 blocks from here. For you, that should take, I don't know, a second? Maybe 2? The important thing is to focus on your destination. Picture it in your mind. And try not to run through any buildings. Or people," Caitlin added, her voice a nervous counterpoint. "Please don't run through people." "Right. People. Definitely don't phase through people. It's probably messy," Cisco said. "Okay, crash course is over. Run, new guy, run!" Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that felt far too slow for the world he was about to enter. He took a breath, pictured the museum from the map he saw on the monitor, and pushed off. The world outside SDR Labs dissolved into a smear of abstract color and shrieking sound. It was nothing like his previous, uncontrolled burst in the lab. This was sustained. The city became a tunnel of light, buildings blurring into solid walls of brown and gray, streetlights streaking past like tracer fire. The rain wasn't individual drops. It was a million tiny, stinging needles against the friction-proof suit. His mind, which prided itself on its ability to process information, was completely and utterly overwhelmed. He couldn't distinguish one building from the next. He was a bullet fired into a hurricane. Too fast. Slow down. He screamed internally, but his body didn't listen. He overshot his target by 6 blocks, his momentum carrying him into the city's financial district before he could finally grind to a halt. He skidded to a stop in a shower of sparks, his boots melting a small patch of asphalt. He stumbled, catching himself on a lamppost, his chest heaving as he tried to reacquaint his brain with the concept of a stationary world. "Whoa, you okay?" Cisco's voice buzzed in his ear. "You look like a bottle rocket with a broken stick." "I'm fine," Izuku gasped, shaking his head to clear the dizzying afterimage of his run. He turned and, with a slightly more controlled burst of speed, raced back towards the museum, arriving this time with a clumsy but effective stop just across the street. The Central City Museum was a grand, neoclassical building with towering marble columns. Police cars were parked haphazardly out front, their red and blue lights painting the scene in frantic, silent strokes. Officers crouched behind their vehicles, guns drawn, their breath pluming in the unnaturally cold air. The entrance of the museum was a gaping maw of darkness, and a shimmering, visible wave of cold radiated from it, frost creeping across the marble steps and freezing the rain into a treacherous sheet of ice. This was it. His first test. He wasn't Deku, the symbol of hope's successor. He was an unknown, a ghost in a stolen suit. He took a final, steadying breath and shot across the street, a silent, crimson blur that none of the police officers even registered. He entered the museum's main rotunda. The air was frigid, the temperature dropping so low he could feel it even through the insulated suit. The marble floor was coated in a dangerous layer of slick ice. In the center of the room, several glass display cases were shattered, their contents gone. A half-dozen security guards were frozen solid in blocks of ice, their faces locked in expressions of terror. Not frozen solid, his analytical mind corrected, noting the faint rise and fall of their chests. Encased. He kept them alive, and there he was. Standing before the entrance to the Gem and Mineral Hall was a man in a navy blue, fur-lined parka, his face obscured by a pair of sleek, high-tech goggles. He held a weapon that looked like a prop from a sci-fi movie, a large, metallic gun with a swirling, cryogenic core. He was methodically packing a satchel with glittering diamonds from a case marked Fire and Ice. This was Captain Cold. Leonard Snart. Snart paused, sensing the change in the room. He slowly turned, his movements economical and deliberate. He looked Izuku up and down, his expression unreadable behind the goggles. The silence stretched, thick with cold and tension. New suit, Barry? Snart's voice was a low, gravelly drawl, devoid of any real surprise. You look shorter. The casual dismissal was more unnerving than a threat. This man wasn't afraid. He was annoyed, as if a particularly persistent gnat had just flown into the room. Izuku's instincts took over. He defaulted to the only combat style he knew when facing a long-range opponent: close the distance, overwhelm with power and speed. He crouched, channeling the wild energy thrumming in his veins into his legs. One for all, full cowling. The thought screamed, a ghost of a habit. He would treat this speed like a smash. He launched himself forward, a red streak aimed straight at Snart's center mass. Snart didn't even flinch. He simply raised the cold gun and pulled the trigger. It didn't fire a projectile. It emitted a wide, conical beam of absolute zero. The air in front of the gun crackled and condensed, a wave of pure cold that was less a thing and more an absence of heat and energy. The beam hit the slick floor in front of Izuku, and the world became a frictionless nightmare. His boots, designed for traction at Mach 3, found no purchase. He went down, hard, his trajectory sending him skidding past Snart in an uncontrollable slide. As he passed, Snart casually aimed the gun down and fired another blast, clipping Izuku's leg. Agony. It was a cold that burned, a deep, invasive chill that didn't just freeze his skin but seemed to leach the very energy from his cells. The suit's leg immediately frosted over, turning stiff and brittle. The speed, the vibrant, thrumming power within him, felt sluggish, dampened. He finally came to a stop when he slammed into the far wall of the rotunda, the impact jarring his teeth. You're sloppy, Snart observed, not even bothering to turn around as he resumed packing his bag. And slow. Barry would have had the decency to be on his feet by now. Humiliation burned hotter than the cold in his leg. Izuku pushed himself up, his movements clumsy. He had underestimated his opponent completely. This wasn't like fighting a villain with a simple quirk. Snart's weapon was a tactical tool, and he wielded it with the precision of a master craftsman. Brute force was useless. Okay. Plan B. He charged again. This time, he tried to be unpredictable, weaving from side to side, a blur of motion. Snart sighed, an audible sound of exasperation. He swept the cold gun in a low arc, painting the entire floor of the rotunda in a fresh, mirror-like sheet of ice. At the same time, he fired a concentrated beam at the ceiling. A massive, razor-sharp icicle formed in an instant and dropped, forcing Izuku to abruptly change direction to avoid being impaled. The sudden change in momentum on the frictionless surface was too much. He lost his footing again, pinwheeling his arms as he slid directly towards one of the frozen security guards. He crashed into the block of ice, his head cracking against the frozen surface with a dull thud. Dazed, he slid to the floor, the world spinning. Pathetic, Snart said, zipping his satchel closed. He slung it over his shoulder, and finally turned to face Izuku fully. He raised the cold gun, the cryogenic core whining as it charged for a final, finishing shot. Looks like the city's gone to the dogs. Time to put you on ice. Izuku lay on the floor, his head throbbing, the cold in his legs seeping into his bones. He was failing. He was going to die, a pathetic footnote in a borrowed costume. The fear and shame were a paralyzing cocktail. Then, Cisco's voice, tinny and frantic, crackled in his ear. Kid! Get up! You gotta move! His gun is a portable cyclotron. Barry's files say it needs a 2-second recharge cycle between wide-beam shots. You have to use the windows. The words were a lifeline. Barry's files. The ghost of SDR Labs was helping him. The panic receded, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of analysis. He shoved himself backwards, sliding behind a thick marble pillar just as Snart fired. The beam of absolute zero struck the pillar, and a web of cracks instantly spread across the ancient stone, which groaned under the thermal shock. Safe for a moment. Izuku pressed his back against the cold marble and closed his eyes. The world outside didn't matter. Only the data. He started muttering, the words a low, rapid-fire stream of consciousness that was for him alone. He's not just making it cold, he's creating absolute zero fields, stopping molecular motion. That's why the speed feels sluggish when the beam hits. It's a direct counter. The gun has at least 2 settings, a wide-angle cone for area denial and a focus beam for precision attacks. The whine. I can hear it, a high-pitched capacitor whine right before he fires the beam. The cone is faster to deploy, the beam needs a longer charge. Cisco said 2 seconds for the wide beam, the focused shot must be closer to 4. He's a tactician, not a brawler. He's controlling the battlefield, limiting my primary weapon, mobility. So brute force is out. Head-on attacks are suicide. I can't outpower him. So I have to outthink him. His eyes snapped open. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about being the Flash. It was about being Deku. You still hiding, Junior? Snart called out, his boots crunching on the ice as he slowly advanced. Come on out. Let's finish this. Izuku didn't answer. He peeked around the pillar. Snart was 20 yards away. Too far to rush before he could fire again. Izuku's gaze darted around the rotunda, his mind cataloging every detail. The icy floor. The other pillars. The high, vaulted ceiling. He remembered the feeling of his hand passing through the bed rail. The vibration. Molecular oscillation. If he could vibrate his own molecules fast enough, he could become intangible. He could pass through objects. Or, theoretically, he could negate the friction between his boots and the ice. It was a crazy theory, born of a few seconds of accidental discovery, but it was all he had. He focused, trying to replicate the sensation. He channeled the speed force, not into his legs for running, but into his entire body, commanding every cell to vibrate. A low hum filled his ears. The suit began to blur at the edges. It was an agonizing, teeth-rattling sensation, like being shaken apart on a molecular level, but he held it. Snart rounded the pillar, gun raised. Gotcha! Izuku exploded into motion. He didn't run on the ice. He glided over it, his vibrating boots barely interacting with the frozen surface. The frictionless problem was solved. Snart's eyes widened slightly behind his goggles, the first sign of genuine surprise. He fired, but Izuku was already moving, a red blur that was no longer clumsy but fluid and purposeful. He didn't run at Snart. He ran around him. He circled the rotunda at incredible speed, a crimson cyclone. The air began to churn. Papers, dust, and shards of ice were whipped up into a vortex. What the hell? Snart grunted, planting his feet to stay upright in the growing whirlwind. "It's a vortex!" Caitlin's voice exclaimed in his ear. "He's creating a vacuum to suck the air away from Snart's gun." That wasn't Izuku's only plan. The primary goal was disorientation and deflection. Snart fired the cold gun into the whirlwind, but the beam was dispersed, the vortex turning his focused weapon into an ineffective winter flurry. While Snart was distracted, Izuku broke from the circle. He ran straight up a pillar, his vibrating feet finding purchase on the vertical surface, and pushed off, launching himself into the air over Snart's head. For a split second, he was suspended at the apex of his jump. He could see Snart below, looking up, tracking his movement, already adjusting his aim. He was too good. He would recover and fire before Izuku landed, so Izuku gave him another target. He pushed his speed, creating a speed mirage. An afterimage of himself split off, a solid-looking duplicate that continued his forward arc. Snart, tricked for a crucial half-second, fired at the mirage. The image dissolved into harmless light particles. That was the window. While the real Izuku was still in the air, he phased his hand, just like he had at the lab. It became a ghostly, vibrating blur. He dropped down behind the preoccupied Snart. The 2-second recharge window was closing. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't make a sound. With surgical precision, he plunged his intangible hand through the casing of the cold gun. Then, he let his hand solidify. There was a sickening crunch of metal and wiring. The cryogenic core sputtered, flashed a brilliant blue, and died. The gun was useless. Izuku landed silently behind Snart, holding the now dead weapon. Snart froze, feeling the sudden lack of weight in his hands. He slowly turned, his face a mask of disbelief. He was unarmed, outmaneuvered, and defeated. A surge of triumph, pure and exhilarating, shot through Izuku. He did it. He had faced a real villain in this new world, with a new power, and he had won. "It's over," Izuku said, his voice low and steady, trying to sound more confident than he felt. But it wasn't. From the corner of his eye he saw movement. A high-pitched groan of stressed material. The marble pillar he had kicked off of, weakened by Snart's earlier blast, was finally succumbing to the thermal stress. A huge chunk of it, the size of a small car and covered in a thick layer of ice, was breaking loose and tipping over. Directly below it was a museum curator, a small woman who had been hiding behind a kiosk, now frozen in terror. Time slowed down. Izuku saw two paths fork in front of him. In one, he delivered the finishing blow to Snart, a knockout punch that would end the fight decisively. The villain would be apprehended. The hero would be victorious. In the other, he saved the woman. For Izuku Midoriya, there was no choice. It wasn't even a calculation. It was a reflex, as ingrained in him as breathing. A hero saves people. He dropped the broken cold gun. He forgot all about Snart. He poured every ounce of speed he had into his legs and launched himself towards the woman. "Look out!" he screamed. He reached her a fraction of a second before the marble slab hit, tackling her and rolling them both out of the way. They tumbled across the icy floor, coming to a stop a safe distance away. The slab crashed down where she had been standing, shattering into 1,000 pieces with a sound like a thunderclap. The woman was shaking, hyperventilating, but she was alive. Izuku, hovering over her protectively, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. It also left him completely exposed. "Bad move, kid!" Snart's voice growled from behind him. Izuku's head whipped around. Snart had recovered. He hadn't run. He had picked up his satchel of diamonds and was leveling a small, hold-out pistol at him. It wasn't the cold gun, but it looked just as menacing. No, not a pistol. A small, compact version of his main weapon. A cold pistol. Izuku tried to move, to vibrate, to run, but he was too slow. He had used the last of his momentum on the rescue. Snart fired. The beam of cold struck Izuku square in the left shoulder. The pain was blinding, a white-hot lance of absolute zero that drove the air from his lungs. It was 10 times worse than when the beam had grazed his leg. His entire arm went numb, the red fabric of the suit turning white with a thick, crystalline layer of frost. The energy-leaching effect was instantaneous. He felt the speed force inside him gutter like a candle in a hurricane. He collapsed to one knee, clutching his frozen shoulder, a strangled cry of pain escaping his lips. Snart stood over him, the cold pistol smoking in the frigid air. He could have finished him. He could have frozen him solid, taken his prize and walked away, but he didn't. He just stared. His gaze wasn't on Izuku's pained face, but on the terrified curator who was now scrambling to her feet, helped by the very hero who had just been shot for her. Snart's cynical, professional facade wavered for just a moment. He was a thief, not a murderer. He played a game with the Flash, a game with rules. Barry Allen would have done the same thing, saved the civilian. But seeing this kid, this amateur, make the exact same self-sacrificing choice without a moment's hesitation, it gave him pause. This wasn't Barry. This was something different. Something rawer. That hesitation was all it took. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder. The CCPD, seeing the fight was over, were finally moving in. Snart cursed under his breath. The window was closed. He gave Izuku one last, long look. "You've got a lot to learn," he grumbled, then tossed the satchel of diamonds onto the floor. But that wasn't a bad start. Before the police could storm the entrance, Snart turned and disappeared into the shadows of the museum's back corridors, making his escape. The police swarmed in to find their prize gone, but the diamonds safe, the guards alive, and a new, crimson-clad hero kneeling on the floor, cradling a frozen arm. Back in the SDR Lab's med bay, the sterile white was a stark contrast to the chaotic battlefield of the museum. Izuku sat on the edge of the same bed he'd woken up in, shirtless now, while Caitlin worked on his shoulder. She wasn't using bandages or stitches. She was using a device that emitted a low, warm frequency, slowly, carefully raising the temperature of his cells without causing thermal shock. "You're lucky," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. The absolute zero field didn't just freeze the tissue, it created a state of near-total molecular stasis. It was draining the kinetic energy directly from your cells. If you'd been exposed for a few seconds longer, the damage could have been permanent. Your rapid regeneration is the only thing fighting it. The pain had subsided to a deep, throbbing ache. He could move his fingers again, a small victory that felt monumental. Cisco was pacing back and forth, replaying the cowl's sensor data on the main screen, a manic grin on his face. "Dude! A vortex! You created a phase-shifting resonance to negate friction. And the speed mirage! Those are advanced techniques. It took Barry months, years even, to master some of that stuff. You just figured it out based on high school physics and a desperate need not to die. It's insane." Izuku didn't share his enthusiasm. He stared at the Flash suit, which was draped over a nearby chair. It looked alien to him now, a symbol of a victory that felt hollow. "I let him get away," he said quietly, his voice flat. "I failed." "You didn't fail," a voice said from the doorway. Iris was standing there, her arms crossed, a soft but unyielding expression on her face. "You saved that woman. You recovered the diamonds. You drove Captain Cold off. In this city, we call that a win. But he's still out there," Izuku insisted, looking down at his hands. "A real hero would have done both. A real hero knows what's most important," Iris countered, walking over to him. She sat down in the chair next to the suit. "Barry faced that choice 100 times. Save the city or catch the bad guy. Save his friend or stop the bomb. And every single time, he chose to save people. That's what made him a hero. It wasn't the speed. It was his heart." She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "Tonight you had his speed. But you also had a hero's heart. Your own." Her words sank in, slowly extinguishing the cold fire of his self-doubt. He looked at the suit again. He had used its power, yes, but he had won with his mind. And he had made his choice with his soul. He hadn't been pretending to be Barry Allen. He had been himself. He had saved someone. He had made a difference. Here, in this strange, lonely world, he had found a purpose, if only for one night. A single, indelible point of light in the overwhelming darkness of his situation. He finally met Iris's gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than fear or confusion shone in his eyes. It was resolve. "I can't be Barry Allen," he said, his voice quiet but firm, the words tasting of truth and acceptance. I'll never be him. I don't even know if I can ever get back to my home. He took a deep breath. But I can try to be a hero. This city's hero. Until he comes back. Iris Westallen looked at the exhausted, injured boy from another world, who was wearing her husband's legacy like a shield against his own despair. And in his determined green eyes she saw the same light she had seen in Barry's all those years ago. A different light, a different color, but the same unwavering flame. She smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that reached her eyes for the first time in 6 months. That's all we could ever ask for. The sun rose over Central City, casting long, clean shadows across streets still damp from the previous night's rain. For most of its citizens, it was just another Tuesday. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the dawn of a new, terrifying, and meticulously scheduled era. He was awake before the sun, the thrumming energy of the speed force a constant, vibrating hum in his bones that made sleep a fleeting luxury. He had discovered that if he didn't burn off the excess energy, his thoughts would race at 1,000 miles per hour, and he'd start to vibrate uncontrollably in his sleep, occasionally phasing a hand or a foot through his mattress. He wasn't in the med bay anymore. Cisco had cleared out a small, unused storage room for him, a Spartan space with a cot, a desk, and a lamp. To Izuku, it was a palace. More importantly, it was a laboratory. When Cisco and Caitlin arrived that morning, coffee in hand, they found him not sleeping, but working. He was at the desk, surrounded by a fortress of books borrowed from SDR Lab's extensive library, tomes on quantum physics, temporal mechanics, cellular biology, and advanced engineering. The room's single whiteboard was a chaotic masterpiece of equations, diagrams, and frantically scrawled notes. At the center of it all, open on the desk, was a fresh, crisp notebook. Its cover was a plain, unassuming black, but on the first page, in Izuku's neat, precise handwriting, was a title that was both a continuation and a new beginning. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. Cisco peered over his shoulder, a half-eaten donut pausing on its way to his mouth. Whoa! I thought you were kidding when you asked for a notebook. Izuku didn't look up, his pen scratching furiously across the page. He was muttering, a low, constant stream of analytical thought. The energy isn't a simple amplification of biological processes like one for all, it's a fundamental alteration. My caloric intake needs to be 10 times that of a normal human just to maintain baseline functions. Cisco, your high-calorie protein bars are a good start, but the nutrient absorption rate is inefficient. We need to develop a formula that maximizes energy conversion on a cellular level. He flipped the page, revealing a detailed, hand-drawn schematic of Captain Cold's gun, complete with speculative notes on its power source and weaknesses. On the next page was a self-analysis. Subject, Izuku Midoriya. Provisional hero name? Flash? Power source, the speed force, extra-dimensional kinetic energy. Abilities observed. Superhuman speed, top speed unknown. Mach 2 achieved accidentally. Control is minimal. Primary issue is not propulsion but deceleration and navigation. Molecular oscillation. Phasing ability to vibrate molecules to pass through solid objects. Requires intense focus. Question: can this be used offensively to disrupt electronics or destabilize structures? Further testing required. Accelerated perception. Brain processes information at a rate commensurate with physical speed. Major weakness: sensory overload. The world becomes a flood of data that is impossible to parse without a focusing mechanism. Rapid regeneration. Cellular repair is exponentially faster than a normal human's. Healed from localized cryogenic stasis in under an hour. Vortex creation, by running in a circle, can generate powerful whirlwinds. Useful for crowd control, deflecting projectiles, and creating vacuums. Cisco whistled, genuinely impressed. Dude, it took us and Barry months to figure out some of this stuff. You've been a speedster for, what, a day and a half? And you're already writing the textbook. I have to, Izuku said, finally looking up. There were dark circles under his eyes, but they burned with an intensity that was almost frightening. This power, it's not mine. It doesn't feel natural. With One for All, I could feel the vestiges, I could feel the history. This is just a storm. If I don't understand it, it's going to tear me apart. Or worse, I'll hurt someone. This was his new reality. He approached the Speed Force not as a gift, but as the most complex and dangerous quirk he had ever encountered. He would do what he always did: analyze, deconstruct, and master it through sheer, obsessive hard work. That obsession fueled the days that followed. His life became a blur of motion and study. Mornings were spent in the Speed Lab, which he quickly turned into his personal dojo. The training montage wasn't a series of easy victories. It was a grueling, repetitive, and often painful process of trial and error. His first attempt to run up the side of the SDR Labs building ended with a loud smack as he failed to account for gravity and momentum, leaving a comical, Izuku-shaped dent in the brickwork 100 feet up. Sisko's laughter crackled over the comms until Caitlin reminded him about the cost of structural repairs. Izuku, undeterred, went back to his notebook. "It's not about adhesion," he scribbled. "It's about maintaining a constant forward velocity at a 90-degree angle. The speed has to be fast enough that my feet connect with the wall before gravity has a chance to pull me away. I'm not running up it, I'm falling, sideways." The next day, he made it to the roof. Phasing was a nightmare. His first attempts to pass his hand through a solid wall resulted in him getting it stuck. The sensation was terrifying, a pins and needles feeling amplified to an excruciating degree, as if his arm were trapped between two universes. It took a panicked Sisko and a very worried Caitlin 10 minutes to talk him through the process of recalibrating his vibrational frequency to get it out. He retreated to his notes again. Frequency is key. It's not just vibrating, it's matching the resonant frequency of the object's atomic structure. Solid concrete would require a different frequency from steel or glass. He spent the next 3 days in the lab with a set of tuning forks and Sisko's frequency scanner, learning to feel the vibrations of different materials. He started small, phasing a finger through a block of wood, then his hand through a sheet of steel, until finally, he could walk through a solid wall as easily as walking through a doorway. He pushed himself relentlessly. He learned to create multiple, stable speed mirages, using them for misdirection in complex combat simulations Sisko designed. He practiced evacuating entire city blocks in the lab's holographic simulator, learning to carry multiple people without giving them whiplash. He wasn't as naturally graceful as the footage he'd seen of Barry, who ran like water flowing downhill. Izuku ran like a storm being painstakingly controlled, less art, more brutal, efficient science. His movements were sharp, angular, and deliberate, each step a calculated equation of force and trajectory. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he stood on the roof of SDR Labs, the new flash suit feeling a little less like a costume and a little more like a uniform. The city spread out before him, a glittering tapestry of light and life. This wasn't his city, not his world. The ache of what he had lost was a constant, hollow space in his chest. But as he looked out at the millions of people living their lives, unaware of the boy from another dimension watching over them, he felt the familiar, crushing weight of responsibility settle over him. It was a heavy burden, but it was the only thing that made him feel real anymore. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't hear the shift in the atmosphere. The air pressure dropped suddenly. The ambient city noise seemed to warp and bend. A crackle of ozone, sharper and more aggressive than his own, filled the air. A streak of brilliant, angry yellow lightning shot up the side of the building, resolving into a figure standing on the opposite edge of the roof. He wore a suit of vibrant yellow, a perfect inverse of the flashes, with crimson boots and a matching lightning bolt emblem. His cowl was pulled up, and his eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. He was younger than Izuku expected, probably not much older than himself, with fiery red hair that peeked out from under his cowl. His entire posture was a knot of raw, furious energy. "Who the hell are you?" the newcomer snarled, his voice vibrating with speed and rage. Izuku instinctively dropped into a combat stance, the crimson and gold of his own suit seeming to dim in the face of the other speedster's incandescent fury. "I don't want any trouble. You're a little late for that," the yellow speedster shot back. "You're in my city, wearing his suit. So I'll ask again. Who are you?" Before Izuku could answer, Sisko's voice erupted in his ear. "Kid Flash! Wally's back!" There was a note of panic in his voice. "Okay, look, just stay calm. He's going through a lot. Wally West, aka Kid Flash, had been off-world with his team, the Teen Titans, on a mission in deep space. He had been out of contact for months, completely unaware of the new developments in Central City. He had come home expecting to help his family, to continue the search for his uncle and mentor, Barry Allen. Instead, he had come home to find a stranger, an imposter, wearing his uncle's face. "He's my friend," Izuku said carefully, trying to de-escalate. "He let me, he?" Wally spat the word like venom. "You're talking about Barry Allen. The Flash. You don't get to use his name. You don't get to wear his symbol." He vibrated with barely suppressed rage, his entire body a blur of yellow. "I'm his partner. His successor. If anyone was going to take up the mantle, it was going to be me." The grief and anger pouring off him were palpable. This wasn't just about a costume. This was about family. This was about a legacy he felt was being stolen from him by a ghost. Izuku understood that kind of pain, that feeling of being left behind. "I know," Izuku said softly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "And I'm sorry. I never wanted to replace him. The city was in trouble. Captain Cold, he came back. I was just trying to help." "Help?" Wally laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You think you're helping? You're erasing him. Every time you run in that suit, you're telling the world that Barry Allen is gone for good, that we've moved on." "Well, I haven't." He shot forward, a yellow blur. In a fraction of a second, he had crossed the roof and was standing inches from Izuku, his fist cocked. Izuku, whose speed was born of analysis and control, was caught completely off guard by the sheer, raw, emotional velocity of the attack. "Wally, stop it!" Iris's voice was a firm, commanding crackle over the building's PA system, broadcast from the cortex. Wally froze, his fist trembling an inch from Izuku's cowl. He was faster. Izuku could feel it. Wally's connection to the speed force was natural, intuitive, a part of him. Izuku's was a foreign language he was still struggling to learn. "This is who you replaced him with?" Wally snarled, not looking away from Izuku but directing his words to the speaker. "Some charity case who doesn't even know how to stand properly? He runs like a textbook. There's no heart. No soul. Speed isn't an equation to be solved, it's something you feel." "That's enough," Iris said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Down to the cortex. Both of you. Now." Wally held his glare for another long moment before finally pulling back, vibrating with frustration. He shot off the roof in a streak of angry light. Izuku, his heart pounding, followed a moment later, his own run feeling clumsy and heavy in comparison. The cortex was a tinderbox of tension. Wally had his cowl off, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, running a hand through his red hair. He looked at Izuku, who had also removed his cowl, with open contempt. "I don't get it," Wally said, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "Why him? Why some random kid? I'm here. I'm ready." "It's not that simple, Wally," Caitlin said gently. "His arrival was connected to a massive speed force event. The first one since Barry." "So what? The speed force makes a mistake and we just accept it?" He shot back. "He's a mistake. A paradox." The word hit Izuku like a physical blow. Paradox. The name of the villain who had sent him here. Was that what he was? Just an error in reality? "I am not a replacement," Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm, his own frustration finally bubbling to the surface. He was tired of being treated like an object, a symbol, a ghost. "I am a person. My name is Izuku Midoriya. And I am trying to keep your city safe until its real hero comes home." "You think analyzing your way through a fight makes you a hero?" Wally scoffed. "You have to be willing to take risks, to trust your gut. To just run and hope for the best. That's what Barry did." "No, it isn't," Iris interjected, her voice sharp. She stepped between them, forcing Wally to stop his pacing. "Barry was a scientist. He thought his way through every problem. He used his heart, yes, but he always used his head. He would have respected what Izuku is doing." Wally looked betrayed, his furious gaze softening into one of deep hurt. "Iris, Before the argument could escalate further, the world outside the cortex windows seemed to tilt. A collective wave of dizziness washed over them. Cisco, who had been trying to stay out of the family drama, yelped and grabbed onto his console for support. Whoa! What was that? A localized earthquake? On the main monitor, news feeds began to light up. The images were nonsensical, vertigo-inducing. A news copter showed footage of a downtown intersection where cars were driving up the sides of skyscrapers and pedestrians were walking calmly along the underside of an overpass. Gravity, in a 4-block radius, had apparently decided to take a vacation. What's going on? Caitlin asked, her eyes wide. I'm picking up a massive psionic field emanating from the roof of the Cord Tower, Cisco said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. It's warping people's sense of equilibrium. It's him. The top. Iris's face went grim. Roscoe Dillon. One of Barry's oldest. His powers have been getting stronger. Wally didn't wait for an explanation. He saw a threat, and his instinct was to run at it. I've got this, he snapped, pulling on his cowl. He was out of the room in a flash of yellow lightning before anyone could stop him. Wally, wait! Iris called after him, but he was already gone. His powers are psionic! Cisco yelled at the empty corridor. Running fast isn't going to work. You need a plan. He turned to Izuku. He's not going to listen to us. You have to go. Back him up. Izuku nodded, his face set with grim determination. He pulled his own cowl on. The argument, the anger, the feelings of being an imposter, all of it melted away, replaced by the simple, unwavering imperative of the mission. A villain was hurting people. He had to be stopped. He arrived at Cord Tower a few seconds after Wally. The scene was even more chaotic up close. The world seemed to be spinning, a nauseating carousel of warped physics. At the very center of it all, standing on the roof of the tower, was a man in a green and yellow suit, spinning like a child's toy. The top. As he spun, waves of visible, disorienting energy pulsed outwards. Wally was already in trouble. He was trying to run up the side of the building, but the vertigo field was hitting him hard. He was stumbling, shaking his head, his movements sloppy. He looked drunk. Can't focus. Wally grunted, his voice strained over the comms link that Cisco had patched Izuku into. Every time I try to run, the world just flips. Get out of there, Wally! Caitlin urged. No! I can push through it. Wally let out a yell of effort, and tried to brute force his way through the psionic interference, pouring on the speed. It was a mistake. He made it halfway up the building before his equilibrium gave out completely. He let out a disoriented cry and tumbled back down, crashing into a pile of miraculously soft garbage bags in an alleyway. The top laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound that seemed to echo from every direction at once. Is that the best you've got, Kid Flash? The Flash left some mighty small shoes to fill. Izuku stayed back, hidden in the shadow of a neighboring building, his mind racing. He wasn't looking at the top. He was watching the waves of energy, the way they pulsed, their frequency, the radius of their effect. He was observing, analyzing, muttering. The field isn't affecting gravity itself, it's a psionic attack on the inner ear and the brain's spatial awareness centers. It's a focused, repeating wave. But its effect diminishes with speed and distance. Wally failed because he tried to enter the field at a constant velocity, giving Dillon a stable target to lock onto. Brute force won't work. Instinct won't work. It's a math problem. Do you have a plan, or are you just going to stand there talking to yourself? Wally's voice grumbled in his ear. He had already zipped out of the alley and was standing beside Izuku, looking bruised and furious. I have a plan, Izuku said calmly. But it will only work if we do it together, Wally scoffed. I don't need help from the replacement. Right now you're not Kid Flash and I'm not the new guy, Izuku said, his voice hardening with an authority that surprised even himself. We're two heroes trying to stop that man from hurting more people. Your way failed. Are you willing to try mine? Wally stared at him, his jaw tight. The raw, unshakable certainty in Izuku's eyes, the same certainty that had convinced Iris, gave him pause. He hated it. But he also knew Izuku was right. His way had failed. Fine. he bit out. What's the crazy plan? His psionic waves need a target to affect, Izuku explained quickly. If a speedster moves fast enough and erratically enough, they become impossible to track. But we can't move like that while we're inside the vertigo field. So, one of us has to create a zone of stability, a counterfield that disrupts his waves long enough for the other to get through. A counterfield? How? A vortex, Izuku said. Like the one I used against Captain Cold. If I run in a perfect circle at the base of the tower, at a specific velocity, I can create a slipstream, a column of stable air and kinetic energy. It should be enough to disrupt the psionic waves in a narrow path, straight up the side of the building. It will be your runway. Wally stared at him. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was the kind of hyperanalyzed, ridiculously precise plan that would never have occurred to him in a million years. You run interference, Wally clarified, a slow grin spreading across his face as he got it. And I'm the fastball. Exactly, Izuku confirmed. I'll give you a 5-second window. As soon as you see the vortex form, you run. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just run straight up and take him down. Just run. Wally repeated, the words feeling like home. That I can do. They locked eyes for a moment. The animosity was still there, a simmering undercurrent, but it was overshadowed by a new, shared purpose. Izuku shot out from the alley. Here I go! He hit the base of Cord Tower and began to run, pouring on the speed. He pushed past the initial wave of nausea, his mind focused on the numbers, the equation. He calculated the necessary circumference, the velocity needed to counteract the psionic pulse frequency. His world became a circle of concrete and glass. Red lightning trailed behind him, forming a solid, shimmering ring of pure energy. A powerful whirlwind began to form, sucking in loose debris and roaring like a jet engine. On the roof, the top faltered, his spinning slowing for a second. What is this? Interference! Now, Wally, now! Izuku yelled, the G-forces straining his voice. From the alley, a bolt of pure yellow lightning erupted. Wally hit the wall of the building inside Izuku's vortex, in the eye of the storm. The world-tilting dizziness was gone, replaced by the clean, stable runway Izuku had created for him. He was clear. Wally grinned, a flash of pure, unadulterated joy on his face. He was in his element. He pumped his arms and legs, a piston of focused speed, and shot up the side of Cord Tower like a rocket. The top didn't even have time to react. One moment, he was trying to understand the interference below. The next, a yellow fist connected with his jaw. The punch wasn't just a punch. It was amplified by the kinetic energy of a speedster moving at several hundred miles an hour. Dylan's eyes rolled back in his head, his spinning stopped instantly, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The moment he went down, the psionic field collapsed. The world snapped back to normal. People stumbled, cars swerved, but the chaos was over. Down below, Izuku slowed to a stop, his legs burning, his head spinning from running in a circle. A few seconds later, Wally appeared beside him, holding the unconscious top by the collar of his suit. He looked at Izuku, his chest heaving. The triumphant grin was gone, replaced by a complex, unreadable expression. Your crazy plan worked, Wally admitted, his voice low. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't praise. It was a statement of fact, grudgingly delivered. We stopped him, Izuku replied, offering a small, tired smile. That's what matters. Wally looked at the unconscious villain in his hand, then back at Izuku's earnest, exhausted face. He still didn't like it. He still hated that this stranger was wearing the crimson and gold, but he couldn't deny the truth. His instinct had failed. Izuku's analysis had succeeded. And together they had won. He shoved the top towards Izuku. You can have the credit. I've got somewhere to be, and with that, he was gone in a streak of yellow light, leaving Izuku alone on the street as the police sirens grew closer. They were not friends. They were not even partners, but a seed of grudging respect had been planted in the barren ground of Wally's grief. And for Izuku, standing under the shadow of another hero's legacy, that was more than enough.